Are we more comfortable sitting in our pain than walking through our healing, being comfortably uncomfortable?
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of ways that I can say that this was me. I think what happens a lot of times is, even if we are living in very uncomfortable situations, we have toxic friendships, or we're in a toxic relationship to any extent, toxic habits of our own that have nothing to do with other people, that we know aren't serving us well, but it seems hard or like a lot of work. It'll take a lot of time. It requires you to change what you're doing, which is scary sometimes. Sometimes changing yourself means the people around you are going to change, and I don't mean change with you. By change, I mean some will fall off and new people will fall on. And that's scary. It's hard. I've definitely lost friends, or I'll say also just outgrew friends that I had that I was close to. And it just kind of starts to naturally happen if you choose to change your situations and your habits and things like that. So this is definitely something I'm very passionate about. If you are somebody in my life, I am going to do the best I can to encourage you to grow. If it has to do with things you're wanting, not that I'm going to call you out on things you haven't spoken about, but like Alicia and I all the time talk about things we want to change or adjust, or things we're struggling with. And even if sometimes we're just ranting about things, if it's a continuous thing, we're then also trying to work through it together to help each other to grow from that habit, change that habit. Maybe we start doing something specifically together so that we can hold each other accountable because it's something we both want to incorporate.
But just because there's a comment about the shirts, someone said love the shirts.
Yay.
We didn't introduce the shirts.
Not.
But these shirts are available at the shop. They are this brand.
Sorry.
I feel bad saying our shirts because
whatever.
I didn't make them, I just wear them. But
Works for
since
me.
I am part of this brand now, you have a
Yes.
These are our shirts. Court designed them, and they are available on TikTok Shop here. So if you do like these shirts, they come in multiple colors, all sizes.
Yes, I did design them.
Yes, and the logo's on the back. And then if you look at the TikTok Shop, there are many different shirt designs.
Anyway, I think that a lot of times, as uncomfortable as we are and get in not great situations, we get used to it. This also was all prior to my coming to Jesus moment, so I like to think now I handle things a little differently because I'm also praying over things before I make choices. Last year in May, I made a very difficult decision that I don't regret at all, to leave my 8-year relationship with my fiance. And that was probably the hardest thing I've ever done. And because it wasn't a full-on toxic relationship in, I feel, the general ways you would think a relationship is toxic. It was a lot of just kind of outgrowing each other, or me outgrowing him, in ways that ultimately now I realize even more so couldn't have really changed, because I then also had a coming to Jesus moment and that wouldn't have aligned either. But I just didn't feel like I was where I was supposed to be with who I was supposed to be with anymore. And oh boy, I do not want to cry.
Oh no, it's so early in the life to cry.
Okay, so that is a really hard decision to make.
She was like, the story's over at the end.
It's a hard decision to make when not everything is bad, and it's just that it doesn't feel right, for a lot of reasons. I also believe, well, this is the worldly phrase, but because that's where I was at then, I do believe everything happens for a reason. Again, I probably never would have came to Jesus either if I hadn't left that relationship. Emotionally, I was probably checked out for much longer prior to actually leaving because I wanted so badly for it to work. But I probably could have left at least a year prior to when I did. I don't regret waiting. Again, I think there's a reason everything happened when it did. So, no regrets. But I held on for so long. One, there was a lot of time invested. I was approaching 30, and we had like a future basically planned together. Started talking about kids and like a date for our wedding and all kinds of things. Our lives were intertwined, our families, everything. We were together for 8 years. So it's a big change to commit to, because I knew the second I opened my mouth, then everything else was going to unfold. I knew it was going to be a lot of work. We had pets together that I didn't know if I'd be able to take or how that would work. Obviously, we lived together for 6 of those 8 years, so furniture, like just everything. Like it took me a month to bring all my stuff out because I knew it was hard. It was hard to continue making that choice. But again, so point being, is I stayed comfortably uncomfortable for probably 1 to 2 years prior to actually leaving, because it seemed so much harder to change my life at that point than to just try to be as happy as I could be in that relationship. And that's just not always, it's never really the best option. So as much as it's painful to make changes, I knew holidays would look different. I would lose a lot of people that I was thankful to have in my life. But that's where what discomfort would you prefer? The discomfort that brings you closer to your purpose, brings you closer to God, the discomfort of making changes that ultimately are going to lead to a better life and a better version of yourself, or the discomfort of feeling sluggish, fatigued all the time, not feeling very loved, or whatever your situation is that's hurting you or holding you back from things you really want to experience and do with your life. That discomfort is going to be forever, where if you choose to stay there versus the temporary discomfort, even if it lasts longer than you want it to, of making those changes where then it leads to better. But it takes making that first step out of your comfort zone, your uncomfortable comfort zone.
And that's why a lot of people get
I'm
stuck.
just going to turn the camera a little because
Oh, that's fine. I also keep moving to the side. That's also where people end up getting stuck, is because even though they're uncomfortable, they're used to it.
yes.
So it's not a comfort,
Right.
but you're in that, oh, well, this is how it's always been, so who
Yes.
cares? Like, it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things, now at the time, because you weren't a Christian, this didn't,
Mm-hmm.
like, hit home, but thinking back now, and you just said it, that it gets, like, coming out the other side for the better,
Mm-hmm.
is that a lot of times as Christians, we block what God has planned. Now, God's plan will always prevail. It's just a matter of if you're part of it or not. Like, God's
Mhm.
plan is happening with or without you.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know about everyone else, but I want to be part of God's plan. Like, that just sounds way better than my plans. So, I think the thing is that we forget that God has such a better plan for us. Because really, if you had stayed, you would not have become a Christian. You would, and if you did, it would have been even harder for you to, like, step into that.
Which, for that reason, I think I just would not have.
Right.
I would have been like, I literally came.
Yes. So, like, you wouldn't have come to Jesus. You wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be living the life that you're living now, which is, even though it's so different, and there probably are a lot of things that you miss from your old life. Maybe.
Not much.
Your face says no.
The couch, maybe.
The couch I slept
That
on.
TV scene was nice. And I did leave a shoe rack, which I very much, that I regret. I don't have many regrets, but I do regret
Regret
leaving
letting
that.
you keep stuff like the shoe rack.
Yes, it was such a good find.
Yeah, you definitely need a shoe rack. You have so many shoes.
Anyway.
Me
At
and
least
my
you got us
two-
off topic there for a second.
Me and my 2 pairs of shoes. Yeah, I literally have 2 pairs of shoes. 2.
I know. That times.
10. No. You have more than that downstairs that we block God's
Yeah.
plan from ourselves when we hold on to those uncomfortable things. And it could be like relationships and
Mhm.
stuff. It could be mindsets. It could be like whatever that healing and moving forward looks like for you at the time. You're just holding yourself back, which ultimately is holding you back from being part of God's plan.
Yeah. And what you started to say about getting used to the discomfort,
Mhm.
I did not know truly how unhappy I was
True.
until the very end.
Yeah.
But I did know at the same time. I just hoped it would get better. But I think when I say I didn't know how unhappy I was, like I was happy being almost married and having a life planned out,
Mhm.
and that was something I feel I never really thought about for myself. So even though it's like the polar opposite, now I have no idea what I'm doing with my life, and I'm single, but I am by far way more happier than I was then. And even when I first left, I felt horrible. I felt like I had the emotional flu that like I just like, I don't know, very strong, not happy type feelings, but at the same time, though I couldn't really express it, I knew that I did the right thing.
Mhm.
And that's a very bizarre feeling to experience too, because as exhausted as I was emotionally and mentally, I knew that going back was way worse.
Mhm.
And I didn't know when, but I did know that eventually I would adjust to a different life, a new life, whatever that was going to look like. And it's not, that middle part is not easy. The first step isn't easy, but usually the aftermath isn't worse. So,
Right. And at least, even if it takes a long time to move fully forward with figuring out what's next, or like, not even specifics, but like, just like as you left, that in between was really hard, and you might have been figuring things out, but like you said, you had a peace in that situation. You knew that it was
yeah,
what you needed to do.
yeah.
So it doesn't necessarily make it easier, like in the sense that it's not difficult to do all of that, but like specifically you saying that makes me think about how after this last situation before you came here, you specifically said, now this was after knowing Jesus, the peace that you had through all of that, and I know it was a lot different, but just you going back to after that initial first step in everything over the last year, I seriously see God's hand over the
Careful.
whole situation. And we need tissues.
No,
and all the kids are asleep.
No, I have 2 boxes.
But like seeing God's hand over that, because really, like, what explains that peace of mind?
Yeah, because
through
nothing
all of
else is
that.
different.
Right.
God's plan is always going to follow through with or without you, and then it's up to you if you're part of that or not. There's so many ways that God gives us to heal, but we get so focused on one way that we can't heal if we can't go down that path. So the examples that were given were like, I want to work out, but I can't get to the gym. Like maybe you don't have a car or public transportation, whatever. You want to work out, you can't get to the gym, so you just don't ever work out. You can go for walks. You can work out at home. You can do body weight exercises. There are other options, but you're so focused on the gym being the thing you want to do to get from point A to point B or whatever, and then just choosing to do nothing because you can't choose that option.
A lot of people do stay in really crappy relationships because they think, well, I don't want to leave until
Yes.
I know, like, this is set in place,
Yep.
or I have someone else, or I have a place
Yep.
to go. They won't leave unless it's all set up, but then you're just stuck because you're in your comfort zone. You might not be saving the money. You might not
Yeah.
be looking for another place or finding a friend to help you. Like, you're just like, oh, well, I'm here, so I'm stuck.
Yeah.
And that's, as a stay-at-home mom who doesn't have her own significant income right now, I see that a lot in the stay-at-home mom community, that they're
Yeah.
like, well, I'm home with my kids, so I'm just going to stay so that I can be home with my kids. And
Right.
then you're just
Yeah.
stuck.
That God will give us multiple ways to get to where we're trying to go or to heal. But we have to be close to God in order to see those as options. You can't not have a relationship with God. You can't not be praying over your situations and seeing other things as options if you're not talking to God. You just end up with this very narrow mindset, and you are trying to control the situation because you want to do that option, and nothing else is an option.
sense,
Yeah,
yeah.
like nothing else makes sense to you. It's great to pray about it and give it to God, but then you still have to follow that with action.
Apply
as
it to your life.
Yes, like as opportunity presents itself, and do so with discernment too, because
Mhm.
there are also going to be distractions and temptations.
Yeah. And sometimes, Emmanuel and I were literally just talking about this downstairs about a completely different situation, but sometimes the action is praying, well, I would say not necessarily praying, but like reading your Bible, doing devotions, putting in the mental and spiritual work. Like sometimes the action isn't, okay, I have to leave, or
Right.
I didn't notice your knee was so close to me. Sometimes the action isn't like, okay, I have to leave, or I have to, break off this friendship or relationship, or I have to do this thing. Sometimes it is doing the inner work first. So your action just has to continue to bring you closer to God. So
Mhm.
when you are sitting there going, okay, let's use working out for an example, like, oh, I have to start working out, you're going to continue to self-sabotage and not work out and not do the things that you need to do until you have the inner work done anyway. Like,
Mhm.
you can work out for 6 weeks straight and then you're immediately going to stop because, something's going to come up and you didn't do the work to overcome that obstacle.
Mhm.
So sometimes your action is, like you said, like, you can't just pray about it. You still have to do some sort of, like, actionable step. But sometimes that's journaling,
Mhm.
like getting workbooks, getting devotionals, listening to webinars or seminars about these topics to really dive deeper with your relationship with God to allow Him to heal you in
Yeah.
ways.
I think the other important thing that I feel I learned and incorporated pretty quickly when I started to pray was no matter what, thanking God for where you're at, where there's always things to be thankful for.
Mhm.
So I think, at least for me, it's important to me that each time I go to God, it's not just because I want something or need something, or that's the only reason I'm going to Him. It's also to thank Him
Mm-hmm.
for all the doors He slammed shut that I kept trying to pry open. For the opportunity to be here because He placed Alicia in my life 5 years ago, and I'm super blessed for that. Just generally for the fact that I'm alive, breathing.
Yeah.
I just, even if it's seemingly small things to you, I do think there are always things. If you're alive and breathing, there's something to be thankful for. And I think that can be really hard when you're going through the thick of it.
I don't know stuff.
But I do think that that's a very important piece as well when you are praying, that it's not only because you want or need something. And something someone asked me, what about when you're praying for something and you're not getting it or it's not happening? And I think a couple of things about this. One, and this is something that I had to change. I went from praying to God that He makes what I want happen, pretty much, to maybe a middle ground of like, okay, I guess if it's like in your will, could you maybe? To then ultimately trying to just let go and let God and just asking Him for that wisdom and discernment to hear Him through the noise and distractions and recognize signs that are from God versus it being, a temptation or a distraction that's not really going to get me where He wants me to go. But if you were praying over something and nothing's happening, that also could mean that you're either praying for the wrong thing. It could just be not the right time. And then something relating to that someone said once is that God will only deliver perfection. So if He's not delivering what you're asking for, one, it's either not what He has planned for you, or the other side to that is that it's not time for you to have that yet, or to be in that place yet, in that relationship yet, or whatever it is. He's not going to make it happen until it's on His timeline that He has it planned for you.
And I do think that's where healing comes into place, because the Bible tells us in multiple places that trials and tribulations are what help us grow.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to, God's perfecting what He has for you, but He's also perfecting you for what's to come. And if you're not ready for it, I always give this example, but think about the people who win the lottery.
Mm-hmm.
People who win the lottery literally go bankrupt within a few years. That's
so weird. So me, just talking about it.
That's so funny.
That's so sad.
I don't know.
It's like bing, 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 bing.
But yeah, like the people who win the lottery, they go bankrupt so fast because they're not ready for the money. They're like, oh, I have a ton of money, let me just blow through it. They don't know how to utilize it. They don't know how to invest or save or, be smart with it. They just blow through it. It's the same thing with God's blessings for us.
Mhm.
If we're not ready for them, we're going to blow through them. We're not going to appreciate it the same. We're not going to steward it the same. And so we have to do that inner work, that healing. We have to grow our relationship with Him, essentially,
Yep.
to wait for that time.
Mhm.
Because we're not always going to see it. We're not always going to see when God's working. We're not always going to see when He is, preparing things for us.
Mhm.
We just have to believe because we know that He's a man of His word.
Right. Essentially, there is a paralyzed man at the pool. Basically, there's like sections of different people around the pool that they stay by the pool. They can be paralyzed, blind, have some kind of ailments, illness, whatever, disabilities. And but every so often, an angel comes down, stirs up the water, and they're supposed like one person basically can get into the pool at that time, and it's
Yeah,
healed.
it's supposed to be like you're at that specific time that this
Yes.
thing happens. You have to be in the water,
Yes.
like, right then.
And it's
there.
only, it's like the first
Yeah.
person in is the person that gets healed. So anyway, there's a paralyzed man, and Jesus comes along and says to him like, don't you want to get in the water?
Yeah.
And he's like, well, I can't get there. Like, I can't walk there. There's no one to help me. And then that's when Jesus heals him, right?
Yeah, he just says, get up and pick up your mat
Yeah.
and walk.
So that was kind of the example of like that man only saw one way to be healed, was that, well, guess I'm never going to be healed because I can't get in that water because no one's here to help me to it and I can't get to it. But Jesus gave him another way of just healing him then and there, and he was able to just get up and walk. So I think that that's a good example of
Yeah.
like, you're so the gym is all the way over there, so I can't work out because
Yeah.
I can't get to it. I can't walk there, it's too far. I don't have a car. But there are, if you want something, you will find another way, or you will
Yeah.
choose another way.
And with God, most of the time, it doesn't look how you want it to.
yes,
look.
that's also true.
Like, things never really look how you envision it in your head. Mostly because God's plan is always better.
Yep.
Whether it looks better, like, on paper for you, or if it's
Mhm.
just better because maybe it's better for someone else that your life is that way, or, like, better for His plan. Like, you never know what the ripple effect of your life is. Like, living here in this house. I hate living in the city. I hate being in the city so much. I am not a city person. I don't like living in the city. I want to get out of the city. But the amount of people, like even local people that I've been able to help, even in the smallest ways, like that one man who walked by and I filled up his water jug that one day, like super small stuff
Yeah.
that, you don't know, like maybe that's the only water he had all week, or like something like that. Like you don't know what your life has to do with other people. I know we kind of just talked about that anyway with, one of your friends having a specific job and having an interaction with a customer, but not really feeling called at his job. But then we see like, but you just had that interaction with that customer,
Right.
and clearly God was working. So again, like honestly, like you just said, staying in thankfulness is one of those ways to just continue to see God work
Yeah.
and staying focused on God, because like in that story, he was focused on the pool. That paralyzed man was focused on the pool. He was focused on, okay, what can I get myself to heal? And then as soon as he, obviously it's like different, like it's more surface level in the story, but he switched his focus to Jesus, literally, because he was standing there, or sitting there, talking to Jesus, and he switched his focus to Jesus, and then Jesus was like, you're healed, we're good to go. Huh.
Like, you know why I'm laughing?
Yeah. Yeah, so he switched his focus to Jesus. Things changed. So it's the same in our life. We might not see it right away like he did, obviously, but when we switch our focus to Jesus, we will see those things come to light more, because we will be able to recognize like, okay, well, I don't like this, that, and the third about my life right now, but I got to help that person, or I got to talk to this person, or I got to, show up for that person, and it's so, you see God's plan in a new way.
There are a lot of us that are are or have been in difficult relationship situations, and are now trying to navigate the dating world again. And someone asked tonight, like, when the feeling after getting out of a relationship, like feeling like it's your fault for missing red flags or certain behaviors, or for not, like, you don't trust yourself anymore to make better decisions, essentially. And know your boundaries, hold your boundaries, because it's one thing to have boundaries, it's a whole other thing to hold them, and to know when, as much as I think boundaries should be pretty firm, but there are times boundaries waver because it also depends on situations sometimes, and, even when you are with your person, your significant other, even if you are in a healthy relationship, there are times certain things end up, like, more give than take, one way or the other, so it's not always a clear-cut thing. How do you trust yourself again to make better decisions in the future when you knew for a while you should have left the relationship earlier or never gotten into it in the first place? Again, this is also where, though, for me, I really don't see the icebreaker questions. If you could go back to any point in time in the past, what would it be, or something like that? And could I come up with something to come up with something? I guess. But, like, I wouldn't. There isn't, like, everything happened when it did, how it did, for a reason, and got me to where I am now, which is better than any situation I've ever been in.
Yeah.
And the happiest I've ever been in, and the most I've, like, lived and enjoyed my life ever. So, especially as an adult, trusting yourself, making better decisions. And this doesn't have to only apply to relationships. It just seems a lot of us are in a similar boat. So, honestly, now, not that I've had, like, a ton of experiences since my coming to Jesus moment, especially, but I do think every time I choose to not make time for God on a daily basis, I get, even if I'm barely doing, I haven't been out as much, like, as many nights as I was before. I'm still staying up late. I'm just scrolling, watching a show or whatever, and then I'm too tired to read my Bible, or I fall asleep while I'm praying, or then I wake up late and I have to hop on a Zoom call and I have like 5 minutes to say a quick prayer to at least start my day with that. But that's not what I want. That's not good enough, and there's no reason that I don't have the time to make for God and to read my Bible. And I also started watching some videos that help explain the stories a little better and put like a visual on things rather than just like reading a lot of words that my brain can't always comprehend. It's nice to have like someone talk through it sometimes.
Yeah.
But there's every time I get in this pattern of, oh, I didn't read my Bible today, but tomorrow I'll spend extra time in it. Guess what? Then I end up not spending any time in there again, or just a little bit of time, and then I'll say, oh, well, I'll come back to it later. There's no reason for me to even get in that habit because I have plenty of time. So what really stood out to me, so every time I let myself get further from God and not spend that time with Him, I feel drained. I get anxious again, which is something that's been much better since my coming to Jesus moment. And I also have way less people in my life that annoy the crap out of me.
Yes.
So that helps. But
yes, it does.
But I can't see myself finding my next person if I have zero focus on God, other than showing up to church on Sundays and for my Bible study on Monday nights. I don't see myself finding my person because I'm then just exhausted and anxious, and that is not even the type of like habit. And first of all, if I want someone who is God-fearing, those aren't going to be their habits, and it doesn't mean it needs to be perfect all the time, but there's no reason that I should be not spending any time with God on a daily basis, even outside of prayer, in my opinion, because I know that I have the time. It's different if, to each their own, but that's something I feel convicted of.
Different for everybody, but, because like even, I mean, we've had this conversation before, but like, even like me in this season of life, like, getting up early to read before my kids wake up is not always an option. Usually my kids wake up before I do. And could
And
I
it's
wake
early.
And it's early. Could I do that? Yes. I'm sure I could make that work. But and like sometimes I do, but like really it's not about I do pray when I wake up, but like specifically diving into the Bible, like I find time to do that throughout the day in other ways. And I do it when my brain can really comprehend it. I do it, nap time, bedtime, whatever. So, like you said, it's going to look different for everyone, but the focus has to be there.
Right.
So, as long as you are Matthew 6:33, seek first the kingdom of heaven. There's more words to it, you may look it up, but that's the point I want to make is like, that's what we want to do.
Right.
Whatever that looks like for you, nothing else is going to fall into
I literally have a
place.
I feel like I have gotten in the bad habit of nothing making sense when I'm reading it. And I don't know if that's because I'm reading once I'm too tired. I don't know if it's just a lot for me because there's still a lot I don't know and understand. But the message on Sunday, who cares if you don't understand it?
Yeah.
Read it, ask, look it up. And I feel like that was helpful to me to hear because I don't always have to understand everything that I'm reading. I can always reread it, not like it's a one and done thing. I could probably, really in today's day and age, I could probably YouTube explanation on whatever, even if it's specific verses. Like, there are so many resources that I also have a bad habit, which I've told you before, that like, I will purposely pick the books in the Bible that are shorter.
Yeah, so you finish it.
Yes, because which is kind of stupid, just because when you read a normal book, you're not reading the entire book. Well, some people do. But like, even in that, I can't stop in the middle of a chapter. Like that's just my own mental health issue.
Same.
But like, I can't stand stopping in the middle of what I'm reading. And to me, like, once I start the story in the Bible, it's 50 pages long. I have to read the whole thing. And but that is then deterring me from even opening my Bible. And that's my own doing. That's literally nothing other than my own stupidity.
It happens.
So anyway, the point is, anytime, the relationship. So
we'll get there eventually.
So I do think some of it is trusting yourself, but the other part of that will help you trust yourself is that you're trusting God to lead you, and you are going to Him through everything. So I made the analogy, I don't know if I used this with you or not yet, but I like doodled it in my journal too, that like now navigating life, I feel like I sit inside a bug zapper. Like, I'm the light inside of it, and God is like the cage around it, or the electricity part. That like every time a new person like comes in my life, I'm like, God, if this is not it, please reject it, and just like zap.
Yeah.
Dead.
That's
not actually,
so
but
funny.
to me.
Well, not dead
to me.
That's
or
so funny.
just makes it very clear that it's not it. Even the last situation that I was going through seemed very given by God. I was praying over every single thing, and prayers were constantly being answered through our communication in crazy ways. And then all of a sudden, and I continued to pray. I prayed over very specific things that I was not willing to budge on. And sure enough, all of a sudden,
Bye-bye.
zap.
And I do think, because like looking back at that, I still think it was God working through the whole thing. But like we said earlier, it's not always going to look the same. So sometimes that is God testing you. Are you going to stand firm? Are you going to keep coming back to me every time this happens? Amanda and I were literally just talking about that downstairs, kind of like how, we tend to have this habit, less now, more before, but like, I trust God. I'll say I trust God. I pray over things, but then when I don't see things happening, I start to take my own action. Or for myself, this happens a lot in business, is I start to see the momentum, and I'm like, yeah, God and I are working on this. God and I are working on this. I'm working on this. I'm working on this. And then, like, I stop praying over all of my videos. I stop praying over all of my ideas because I'm just like, oh, God gave this to me. Let me roll with it. And it's not that I'm intending to leave out God, it's that I'm like, well, God gave me this idea, so I should run with it, instead of like, we should run with it.
Yeah. Like, this is the first time I'm really approaching potential people or whatever
Right.
with God by my side. So it was definitely a crazy experience, and then weird when it just stopped. But a couple things. What I said during group last week was that there's another side to that. If the other person is not doing the same thing I'm
Yeah.
doing about the situation, they are the ones then taking control and
Mm-hmm.
doing their own
That's
things.
true.
And God can't also then lead
Yeah.
them. And
Which-
ultimately, I don't want to be
Right.
with someone who's not going to God
Mm-hmm.
or have that relationship. And I think, you know, even if it was that I helped lead that person towards proper resources for them to get back into that relationship with God,
Mhm.
they still were actively choosing not to.
Yeah.
So it can't work. It
Right.
can't go forward. And then, like you were saying, crossing paths with somebody, even though it looked a certain way to me, doesn't always mean that that is the reason God crossed our paths
Right.
either.
It could be literally any other
Yeah.
reason.
It could be testing my boundaries and how
Testing
firm they are.
them.
Right.
Yeah. And I think
Or
too.
to also, like, I was also thinking from the perspective of, like, well, yeah, it kind of being a test for him too. Like, are
Yeah.
you going to take this opportunity,
To
even
move
from a
forward.
friendship
Yeah,
perspective, of like, this person can help you,
Mhm.
whatever.
Right. So it's funny because I don't know if you remember, but we had this conversation with
Mhm.
the previous person.
Mhm.
We had this conversation about that situation because this was after everything ended, after everything moved forward, you came to Jesus. But I remember having the conversation of just because you're on this path and following Jesus, and then he's on this path following Jesus, but he loses focus, it could have initially been God's plan for everything to work
Yeah.
out. But because he is choosing to actively not focus on God,
Yeah.
then his plan is derailed. Now, that doesn't really change anything for you per se,
Mhm.
because God's still gonna have a plan. He knew that was gonna happen.
Right.
So he's
Which I did.
Yeah. Well,
Would have been nice.
win some, you lose some. But like you're still gonna have your own life, and
Mhm.
things are gonna work out bigger and better. But like that could have been God's initial plan, but He gives us free will. So if that
Right.
person chooses to use their free will to do something else, then
Right.
too bad, so sad. You chose the wrong direction.
Right.
But kind of going back to like this is where healing is important, because when you are focused on God, you are doing the inner work with God. Like you are allowing the Word to change your mind. You are allowing the Holy Spirit to help you and guide you. You are allowing Jesus to heal you from the inside out. You are focused and putting in the work with Him, like basically putting in the work to surrender so that He
Mhm.
can do the work. But when that is the main focus, that's when you're able to take that action. That's
Yeah.
when you're able to discern situations. That's when you're able to get out of your comfort zone and become comfortable instead of uncomfortably or comfortably uncomfortable.
Mhm.
That's when things can change. So
Yeah.
like when you start to feel stuck, is it because the situation sucks or is it because your focus is off?
Yeah.
Because if it's because the situation sucks, just stay focused. If it's because your focus is off, refocus.
Yeah, it's not just about trusting yourself to make better choices. A huge part of it is about trusting God and going to Him over these situations, these whatever, the people you come in contact with. And that's where I thought of the bug zapper concept
Mhm.
is because even before my coming to Jesus moment, I seem to attract low hanging fruit. But I think I've always had, I mean, I literally have a tattoo on my arm that says choose happy. My motto, even, I don't know, I think I came up with it when I was like 17, was live with a smile. Like, I've always had a positive attitude, perspective, outlook. Like, doesn't mean that I didn't feel things and go through hurt. And you are somebody like that, and you have this light that shines.
Just put it.
People who don't have that but want it
Mm-hmm.
or want to feed off of it are attracted to you. So that's a problem.
Yes, and that's where Jesus comes in.
Yes.
Because I know we just had this conversation too. When Jesus was discipling, when Jesus was out there and he was preaching and he was making his disciples and he was, training them up and healing people and doing this stuff, what did he do when he wasn't with people? He was constantly going to be by himself with God. That's what he was doing. He was spending time alone with the Father. He was resting. He was praying. He was focused.
Yeah.
So, like you said, those people are going to be attracted to you. And you want them to be, to
Right.
an extent, because you want those people to be attracted to the light that Jesus gives us. You want people to be attracted to the Holy Spirit and come close to you so that you can share the good news with them. But that's where that focus comes in, that healing comes in, because if you're attracting that type of person who is not focused on God, does not know God, or isn't living for God, and they're ultimately going to pull you down and pull you away from God, you have to have the discernment to say, okay, I have to set these boundaries with this person so that I can spend time with God, but then also minister to them. When Jesus ate with sinners, when Jesus spent time with sinners, I'm saying that as like people who didn't believe, people who weren't focused on him, people who when Jesus was out there trying to share the gospel himself, but share God with people, he's told them, go and sin no more. So his intent was to be, he was being very intentional. He was being intentional with people, and that's how we have to be. We have to be focused on God. We have to be spending a lot of time with God, have him part of as much of our day as possible, and in a ton of different ways. And then we have to be intentional with people, with boundaries, with what we share with them, with how we share with them, with what type of things we do with them, what time we spend with them. Being intentional is so important.
Keep your focus on God, otherwise things get messy. And if it's other Christians, that may not make sense to them. Not everybody seems to get it.
Yeah.
Because we all have different experiences. I also think men versus women when it comes to things is very different.
One other thing is you have had the experience consistently over and over again of people being attracted to your light, not knowing how to set the boundaries, and then you get in too deep because they're using you. I can think of literally 4 people from before you moved that were like that, where it would be every conversation was them sucking you dry of your emotions and trying to get you to solve their problems and be their therapist, but then they're gonna go right back to doing the same things. And you're used to people like that. I mean, not for nothing, but the last situation and then the last relationship, it was the same thing. It was people who say they want to change,
or portray that they have,
or saying I'm in the middle of changing. Have changed, am changing, will continue to change. That's what I want. I like having you by my side. You make me do better, feel better, want to be better, and then they use you, and then they're actually, I don't want this. And so that does make it hard to move forward with interacting with people, because your mind is always,
how long is this gonna last?
Yeah, even subconsciously, I don't want to get too deep because I don't want this person to come to me and tell me all their problems and then never be there for me. Or I don't want this person to come in and be okay, here's my trauma dump, thanks for listening, see you next week when I come do the same thing.
Yeah.
Whereas you now, 1, because of Jesus, 2, because of growth, but you're able to set boundaries ahead of time, I think, too. Because that is something, and it is okay to be cautious going into relationships. Even just, friendships, acquaintances, social partners.
Yeah.
I don't know how else to say that, but so from here on out, you have better discernment, you have better judgment, you have better boundaries, where it is a little easier. I'm not saying go out and just hang out with anybody, but it will be easier moving forward, because the past is not going to repeat itself because you are different and your future is different.
Stay focused on God,
Yes.
and He'll do the rest.
Yes, pretty much. And it's funny because Emmanuel and I were literally talking about that before I came up here. Was just how when you stay focused on God, He's doing the work. So a lot of times you'll hear Christians say focus on God, but then also make sure you're taking action but their action is like, okay, because we were talking about finances specifically. So with finances, people will be like, well, God provides, so you have to work overtime. You have to go get a second
Right.
job. Now, can God call you to those things? Yes. Will God open doors to those things that you need? Absolutely. But if you are focused on, okay, I'm going to pray over it, but then also work overtime for 3 weeks, I'm going to pray over it, but Emmanuel specifically was talking about how when his job asks him to travel, and he'll automatically take it thinking, oh, I'm going to make extra money, when in reality he never comes home with extra money, and then he's gone for a whole week. And he's always like, so the last time, I know you were here, the last time this happened, but you know, he prayed over, the first thing he did was pray over it instead of go, what should I do? Let me think about it. He prayed on it, and God basically said, don't go. He prayed over it more, told his boss no, and as soon as he told his boss no, his schedule was full for the week here instead of having to travel. So things like that, like, you'll hear people say, oh, pray on it, focus on God, but also make sure you're taking your action. Your action can just be praying, doing the inner work with Jesus, doing the devotionals, the Bible time, like, that is action enough, because when God needs you to take your action, he will let you know.
Right.
He is the one working.
Yep.
So focus on God, then let him tell you what you need to do next. Yes. Follow this page if you're not already, and then you can also find each of us to follow individually.
Yes.
Yeah, and if you have any questions, any prayer requests, anything like that, please feel free to message that we are the only ones who do
Yes.
anything on here. So it will be between us if you message this page directly.
Yeah.